Thank you, Mr. Barr. Next item on our agenda is City Manager reports. Mr. Husseman.
Thank you, Your Honor. I'd like to spend a little time this evening going through the public safety levy, kind of letting you know where we are with some of the information about this. The information I'm going to put on the screen is largely information that's going out in the utility billing information. In fact, was sent to the printers today. Let's talk about it in general about the public safety income tax levy. This is kind of a baby step toward financial reconciliation for the city because it's public safety only, a completely separate fund. It's a 5-year levy. It sunsets in 5 years, and it does not provide for additional manpower, but only additional, but also no additional cuts. And I think it's important to point out here that we're trying to avoid biting the hands of the police chief and the fire chief as we say this because we want to make sure that they can properly manage their department in the future. But indeed, this does not, we'll make sure that the public is not expecting this is going to suddenly add additional police officers and firefighters. It really does not. By the same token, though, it allows us to continue at our current service levels. Had a discussion earlier today that said, well, there's not much excitement to this, is there? And there really isn't any particular sizzle to this argument. I mean, what do you get for your additional taxes? Well, you basically get what you have today. But the fact is, if you don't pay the additional taxes, in the future you're not going to have what you have today, and that's what we're trying to pass on to people. So, I guess we could spin this in some way or another, but the fact is, this is kind of a routine, this is what we need to do to survive type thing. This is nothing fancy, this is nothing exaggerated, this is not going to do anything spectacular. It just maintains us where we are today, and that's why I say it's kind of a baby step toward our financial situation because it's not where we want to be, but it's where we feel we can be at this point in time. One of the reasons for that relates to the next slide, and that is a history of Middletown's income tax. If you look back to the high point in the last 10 years, it was actually 2004, we had $18,208,000 collected in income tax. If you look at the $17,356 that we collected in 2006, you can go clear back to, in 1999 was the closest we collected of that with $17,286. It's been up and down ever since, but you can see that really over this time period, for the most part, the income tax just hasn't moved up. In fact, in many cases, it's moved down. We are projecting for 2007 a figure of $17,553,000, which is slightly higher than 2006 and lower than 2005. And I got to be real careful when I toss out numbers here because this is, that's indeed a projection. This is not the number we have. Right now, today, our income tax has been running higher than last year and by $1 million. However, we also know that we're just now seeing, we've just seen the second month of the impact of the AK Steel headquarters movement, and so in fact that's a little more severe than we expected so far. So that's why we figure the 17.5 figure may be a little conservative, but it's still in the right ballpark. But overall, if you look at inflation, if you took inflation and added it to the 1997 or 1998 number, projected it all through there, we'd be a lot higher than we are today. We're simply not keeping up with inflation. Let's talk about comparable rates the cities charge. You see the low ones up there on the top, that's us, and Trenton, Monroe, Franklin. Kettering is at 2.25%, Miamisburg at 1.75%, Hamilton at 2%, Fairfield at 1.5%, Centerville at 1.75%, and Dayton at 2.25%. We had some other numbers up here when we originally did this. We had, for example, Springboro on here and Mason on the list. And what gets deceptive about some of those communities is that they do not give full credit for taxes paid on the locations. For example, in Springboro, you would pay, Springboro is 1.5%, but they only give a partial credit for what you pay somewhere else. So if you're a resident, and I'm not sure what that is, like a half or something like that. If you're a resident in Springboro and you work in Middletown, you would have to pay our tax and then half of their tax as well. So you start to see a whole bunch of different deviations in here. So it's hard to simply look at a tax rate from another community and say this is comparable. Some of these cities also have a whole different level of service than we have, and some of them have much better tax bases than we have, and so that does make a big difference. Townships are frequently the comparison, and townships do not charge an income tax, so there's a zero. However, there's a couple of factors that affect townships. One is the fact that they typically have much higher property taxes, which is particularly inconvenient to senior citizens or people who live on the basis of retirement income that we do not tax. Another factor with townships is they're not responsible for the same level of maintenance and such that we are. Portion of their police services are provided by the county. Portions of their roadways are maintained by the county, and so there's a whole different situation. In comparing townships and cities, it's just not a fair analogy at this point. You simply can't make a good comparison there and say that one is cheaper than the other. It's a whole different situation. For the most part, my personal feeling is townships get a pretty good break from the state the way that the programs are written up, but we can't change state law, so we have to work with what we have. Let's talk about what we've cut in the past. We talked about the money going down, but what have we done as far as actual expenditures? If you look at 2000, our general fund expenditures were at the 25 million mark, whereas in 2007 they're at the 21 million mark. That's about a 20% reduction in overall dollars spent over that 7-year period. If you look at the numbers up there as far as reductions in manpower, we've gone from 466 people to 399. And this varies from place to place. You'll notice that the smallest change there is in the fire department. Of course, you all are familiar with that because there was talk of a major reduction in 2007. That was avoided, and so that still was kind of looming out there. But if you look at the other departments, you can see a pretty substantial decrease across the board in the number of city employees. Have city services decreased during this time period? Not significantly. For the most part, we've done more with less. Have demand for services decreased? Not at all. In fact, in a few departments, for example, the police department, the fire department, the demand for service is higher than it's ever been. But again, we're doing more with less. And I think that's what our people want us to be doing. They want the city to do the very best they can with the revenues that we have. I think we've kind of reached a point where we've reached the limit of what can be done there. So let's talk about who pays this tax. This is always very, very confusing because first you satisfy the tax rate where you work, if you work in an area that has a tax. So someone who lives in Sugar Creek Township and lives and works in Middletown, they live in Sugar Creek Township and they work in Middletown, they would pay 1.5% to the city of Middletown, and there is no tax in Sugar Creek Township. And so you first pay where you work. If you live in Middletown, for example, and you work in Dayton, you would pay 2.25% tax to Dayton and nothing to the city of Middletown. Or if you work in Springboro, you pay Springborough's tax, the 1.5%, and then nothing to the city of Middletown. So it's very much an employee-based payroll tax. We call it an income tax. Payroll tax is probably a little more accurate because it really goes back to where the employee actually works as the number one factor. Now, if you work in an area, let's say you don't work in Middletown, but you live in Middletown, and you work in Turtle Creek Township, and they do not have an income tax, then indeed you pay Middletown's income tax because you satisfy. If your township does not have a tax, then you pay where you live, and that is indeed Middletown. Is that clear? This gets really confusing.
No.
But, okay. Well, at least you're honest. It is confusing. First, you pay where you work. You satisfy the requirement where you work. Then you pay where you live if there's anything left beyond that point. There's been talk before about, well, maybe Middletown shouldn't give a full credit to someplace else. So let's say that you worked in Dayton, you live in Middletown, you pay 2.25% to Dayton. If Middletown didn't give any credit, you'd then pay 1.5% to Middletown, 3.75%. I think they'd come and get you for that. I don't think that'd be very popular. But you can see why the credit is very important. But since we do give a full credit to other places, someone living in Middletown, working in Dayton, pays 2.25% to Dayton and nothing to Middletown. Okay. It is confusing. So I guess if people have questions about it, the best thing to do is call us and we'll clarify it for them. Another big question we frequently get is, what is taxed? Again, it's really more of a payroll tax than it is an income tax. We all do our federal taxes. We list all of our interest earnings, our dividends, our pensions, all that go in your federal income tax. Those don't go in your local income tax. Local income tax is indeed a payroll tax. You pay based on where you work. So pensions aren't taxed. Interest earnings aren't taxed. Dividends aren't taxed. It makes for a pretty good deal for senior citizens. Middletown's a great place to live if you're a senior citizen because you're not going to be taxed. Your property taxes are relatively low because we have an income tax, and the income tax does not apply to pension earnings. And so it's a good situation for senior citizens. That being said, if you're a senior citizen who has a job, a part-time job, yes, you will pay, and if that job is in Middletown, you will pay income tax on that part-time job, but your pension will not be taxed. Okay, so lots of confusion that comes from that. Let's talk about the impact here of the income tax. What does this do? First of all, I got to make it very clear, this is an income tax. There is no change in the property tax. People say, well, how many mills is that? Doesn't matter how many mills it is because it's not a millage-based tax. It has nothing to do with whether you live in a shack or whether you live in a $5 million mansion. Does not affect your property tax. It's only based on your income. What is the impact of that? A 0.25% increase in income tax on a $40,000 salary is $100 per year. Simple arithmetic, 0.25 times 40,000, and that equates to about $1.92 per week. And that is deductible off your federal income tax if you itemize. And so I certainly deducted off. I will be deducting Middletown's income tax off my federal income tax return this year, as anyone else does who will be itemizing. So you really don't even pay that full $1.92. If you're in a 20% tax bracket, you pay 20% less than that $1.92, or you pay $80 per year. So it's all deductible off your federal tax. So what if the tax does not pass? First, I want to be real careful here, and what I want to do is avoid making any threats, because nobody likes to be threatened, well, if the tax doesn't pass, we're going to do this, 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 and this, and I really want to avoid that. But I also want to be very honest with people about what the overall financial picture is. We cannot continue to absorb the situation where we're spending more than we're taking in. We've got a limited amount of reserves at which we can handle that. And the fact is that 69% of our general fund is public safety. In fact, it looks like for 2008, that number may actually move up to 70%. But if you look at where we've made cuts in the past, 12% in police, 7% in fire, 10% in public works, other departments, 29%. And that public works number, I got an asterisk there because that's not really a particularly, it's been a lot of emerging departments and that type of thing that kind of distorts that number. But realistically, if 69% of the cuts need to come out of public safety in the future to be able to offset this overall financial situation, we've certainly been very clear about the fact that the fire department will be the hardest hit by this, and I think we're still very prepared to say that. I've stopped short of making actual statements on this and declaring where these things would be. If you want me to do that, I can do that. But I think that we're better off just kind of keeping this a little on the general side and saying, look, folks, it's obviously that 69% of these cuts are going to come out of the public safety side of things because this is a public safety levy, and we can, in the upcoming budget that we're going to present to you, we've already got $330,000 worth of non-public safety cuts proposed. We have no public safety cuts proposed, but $330,000 in non-public safety cuts. So these cuts to offset the failure of this tax would have to come out of the public safety side of things for the most part. So that's why we're looking so closely at police and fire. Realistically, there's another ballot coming up in March, and council will have to decide whether you want to go back to that ballot again in the event that this fails. But I think that the handwriting on the wall here is that if this fails, the citizens are telling you that they're prepared to take the cuts that we're proposing in the public safety side of things. And if you do go back to the voters in March, maybe that's not a public safety campaign. That's something you would have to decide. Hope it doesn't come to that. Hope this one passes and that issue kind of goes by the wayside. But that's as open as we can be at this point, I think. I think we're being very clear that this is public safety oriented, that the cuts are going to be public safety oriented in the event that this fails, because that's where the money is. I mean, there's a limit to how much you can cut out of 31% of the budget, and that's where the biggest cuts have been in the past. So that's what we're looking at. This is, I don't have this last page in the flyer that's going out to with the utility bills, but the rest of this information is all in here. And it's just real obvious that this city has already made significant efforts to make major cutbacks to the point of, 20% of our budget cut back in the last 7 years. That's pretty, and that's recognizing, look at the cost that we've incurred during that same time period. It's gone down by 20%, but costs have gone up probably by 20% in the last 7 years. Look at gasoline costs, just labor costs, everything else that comes with running any type of an operation, healthcare costs. So we've absorbed all those while our costs were falling. So probably comparison to comparison, that number is probably close to 35-40%. Okay. Questions?
Just a couple comments I think we need to be clear on. The money is going to be put into a special fund.
Definitely.
Public safety fund. Would you just explain that briefly to the community?
The city of Middletown operates almost 50 different funds, and basically there are reasons why funds can be spent for different operations. Overall, our budget isn't that disastrous. It's the general fund which is hurting, and that's because you cannot legally transfer things back and forth. One thing that we would do here as a commitment with this tax is that we would put all the tax generated from this into a fund which can only be used for public safety, basically police and fire. That is our public safety. Now, I remember a long time ago when the state put the lottery in place and they said this money is all going to be used for education. You know what? It is. It's all used for education, but what they did was they backed off the other money being used for education. That's not the intent here, and certainly my commitment to the public, and I think your commitment to the public, and you're the ones who are going to be here next year to hear if you don't do this, but the commitment to the public is that the intent here is not to back off on what's being put into public safety out of the general fund. Those numbers would remain constant. The additional inflation would be covered by this additional money, but we're not backing anything off. So the full support that we are putting now into the public safety side of things and this additional money would all be used for police and fire in the future. So this isn't any games. There's nothing going on here. By putting up a separate fund, you assure all the future money goes into that, and anybody can come and look at our budget for 2008, and they come back and look at it for 2009 and make sure all the existing monies are also going to that fund. So very clearly, nothing but public safety with the additional money.
Okay, and one other issue, I just want to make clear that this is a temporary tax for 5 years only. The voters will have a chance to look at what council has done in the next 5 years and what the how the numbers shake out as far as the budget is concerned, and then make a decision in 5 years from now as to whether that tax will continue.
Definitely, and you know, I won't be here to monitor this, but all of you will be, and let's face it, 5 years from now, this doesn't stand a snowball's chance of being renewed if there's any games played. I mean, basically, you have to do pretty much exactly what you're saying you're going to do now over that next 5-year period, or this tax would never be renewed. So council's feet are really being held to the fire on this thing. I mean, you definitely have to do exactly what you said, and that's why I think we need to be very honest with people and very forthright right now about what this is all about.
Any other comments, questions?
Just that it is my intent to hold council feet to the fire, and always was, and guarantee the people that this fund will be created and that the flow of funds will go to this fund and the funds will appropriately be transferred for public safety expenditures. I mean, there's no supposition. This is an absolute. That's where the money goes. And I would expect city staff to make absolutely certain that that is followed by the letter of the ballot, because the wording is on the ballot. And we will be bound by legal balloting law.
I can tell you that in the discussions about this, both with staff and with council, I've never heard anyone say, let's put the spin on this way and do what we want. I mean, it's always been, everybody's very convinced that this is the way it needs to be done, and you know, there's no question about that this is what the intent is.
And I want to defend council too, because I had a couple of people say, well, you know, this isn't all the money that we need. Well, of course we know it's not all the money that we need. We're trying to maintain public safety. That should be foremost an action that government covers for the general populace, and that's your safety. We put a sunset on it, which I was so thrilled about. And it's not an issue of trust with me, okay? Those of you who have that problem, you deal with it. It is a fact that it's impossible to absolutely project how much revenues will be generated by the city in the next 5 years. And hopefully, with the progress, the growth of jobs, we're going to see our projected revenues be wrong. In other words, they'll be short and there will be more revenue generated. That's what the economic development aspect of this is all about. That is its purpose and its function. So it is my fervent hope that at the end of 5 years, we don't need to renew this tax. But folks, we need it